Hello, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about entering into extraordinary consciousness and why we would need different states of consciousness. What are these different states of consciousness and how they can be useful for you in your life? There's different aspects to our brain, and a lot of our reality today is really pushing us to use our frontal lobe in a sense of our conscious awareness, and yet most of our life is governed by our subconsciousness. And so, it's very important to start to really understand the subconscious patterns that we pick up, obviously, during our childhood, which then govern our lives as we're basically inside the matrix or a network of these patterns that basically kind of trap us into a certain reality, especially because most of them are wounds at first. We basically get programmed to be wounded because we don't understand, or we don't have the capacity or the consciousness to understand what's happening at that moment. Therefore, the emotions are too much, and it creates a certain traumatic experience which locks our ego to basically hold on to that and protect us from living that experience again, which then our subconscious pattern basically keeps attracting that back to us so that we can heal from it, but we resist it. And so oftentimes this is kind of why we have loops of experiences, like, for example, different lovers or partners in relationships that repeat similar patterns, right? And we don't know why we keep attracting the same person, but it's because we have a wound in our past, in our subconscious, that is trying to be resolved. And shamanism really does help us with exactly that. It does give us precise techniques to enter into different states of consciousness, to allow ourselves to go into the subconscious, and through images, because that's the language of the subconscious, is that's why art and music are so prevalent in helping us and appease us, and they attract our attention, right, in a weird way that we can't really sometimes explain why you like that painting or why you like that song or why, you're attracted to that image or not. And of course, psychology has used images to determine many aspects of our subconscious working. But basically through images, when we get into these trance states where we kind of like go into another reality, we're able to attune and get into the subconscious and start working through it and releasing different patterns, releasing trauma, releasing the stuck energy, basically, or the stuck wiring, because it really is that way. The synapses of our neurons basically are trained to go through the exact same path, which is exactly where we're stuck in, versus allowing it to rewire itself and fire into a new path so that we can liberate that trauma and that stuckness and that loop. So entering into the subconscious is really important, basically, because it liberates our lives and brings us into new opportunities, to live new opportunities, and to attract new opportunities, which is vital. Because we don't want to be living the same thing over and over and then we die, right? We want to expand continuously, which actually brings us to the next level, which is the supra consciousness, which is really like this other state of being when we're actually completely united with our divine being, the ultimate aspect of ourselves, which basically can see our whole life, our whole conscious and our whole subconscious in another way, so that we can really go into the divine aspect of ourselves, which is very fluid with the universe. It's in total harmony with the universe. It's an eternal aspect of ourselves that never dies. It only grows from all these experiences. And so there is some really amazing capacities that we can attain as humans that I guess, Joe Dispenza tries to talk about a lot, about the superhuman, even though I think he's really just still talking about the subconscious clearing, which allows for the impression of feeling superhuman. And, a lot of synchronicity starts happening. You start bringing in new opportunities, abundance. These are just on this planet, basically, there's a natural element of abundance. There's a natural element of synchronicity. There's a natural element of being in flow, which is extraordinary. And that is really when we go into that subconscious clearing and the programs of our subconsciousness, the traumas of our subconsciousness, the traumas of our youth, and they don't have to be just the youth. I mean, you could have a marriage that goes wrong and creates massive trauma for you at 40, 50, whoever, whatever, whenever. And also something where your work could create a trauma at a certain point where you think that everything is going great and all of a sudden it's not. And so the patterns of our lives bring us into these traumas and they create the subconscious hurt. And so when we clear all of that, we do enter into an incredible state of flow, which brings us abundance, which brings us synchronicity, which brings us these quite miraculous, let's say, yet for me, they're very natural aspects of being. Now, the supra consciousness is a whole other thing. And that's really where we can touch upon, and, the English language actually lacks substance for describing that state of being, of hitting that super consciousness where we truly understand the union of source, God, or divinity within everything, within everyone, within the fact that we are absolutely interconnected to everything. The grass, the butterfly, the bird, the divine sun that is shining just like the darkness of the sky. So all of duality just kind of disappears and you enter into this grace. That's really the word. And it's beyond flow, it's grace. So there's this deep, heartful attitude and feeling of harmony and peace that I think a lot of people are trying to attain within the exterior world, which actually is not real, because it's truly just a state of being that allows us to really explore and experience that internal grace that is ultimate and constant, actually, in that plane of existence. But in our body, in our natural earth existence, we are stuck in duality. And there is this, third dimension, even 5 dimension. I mean, we're actually in 8 dimensions that plays and interacts with itself so that we can learn, grow, experience, and have traumatic experiences that actually enable us to grow consciously. So, what are these 3 states and why do we need these 3 states? And well, the consciousness is, to me, very much like awareness. It's kind of bringing our awareness to what is. Okay, so it's kind of like when you learn something, like math, and you go 2 + 2 is 4. Oh, wow, like now I'm aware of that process. And before, you just didn't really care so much. Just like you learn how to read and the definition of a word. It's the awareness of how things are, maybe calling that thing that is rooted and that gives you fruits, that's called an apple tree. Well, that becomes the awareness of learning what we call that. And then, you have many different languages that can teach you the different names for all of that. And that's basically where consciousness is for me. And it's a certain process that's going on in our brains where we are actively learning and growing, bringing new awareness to reality. And eventually we go into fine-tunement where we start becoming aware of emotions. We start becoming aware of our own patterns, right? And even more, we become aware of our psychology, which is pretty amazing. When we start entering into that state of using our conscious awareness that we can kind of control in a way and use because we've trained it that way, and enter into that other state of subconsciousness, the part that is hidden, the occulted conscious awareness. Now, why would we have that? Well, that subconscious programming, that subconscious awareness is kind of linked into the universe, to this planet, to, it really helps us in a way. You could call it intuition. It's that animal instincts in a way, but I think that's a little tricky. But it's a way of understanding it, of bringing awareness to what is the subconscious, because you don't know why you act in certain ways, but actually the subconscious is an incredible matrix. And I use that word, and some people might get lost in that, but it's basically a program. It's a system, which actually functions with a certain level of life. So an animal is going to have a certain subconscious system, and us humans have a bigger system, where the tree might have a smaller system, but it is the subconscious that actually creates the link between all of us, between all those systems in a sense. And so that it's very systematic. It's very much like a program, like a computer. And that's why the matrix is very much the word I like to use about it. And in that, there's intermatrices, so that you can actually connect those matrices together, so that the subconscious of a tree can be something that we connect to. And it is, and it becomes a symbol, actually. So as the subconscious grows through the evolution of awareness and beingness, then the symbology of other things, primary things, I'll say it that way, like the rock, the tree, maybe the animal, becomes an understanding of the subconscious, which is exactly why we use symbology in understanding or bringing awareness or consciousness towards the subconscious. And one of the greatest tools of the subconscious is the tarot, but there's a lot of occult, knowledge that is here to teach us how the subconscious work. And a lot of the secret societies in the past were all about the understanding of how the subconscious work, because you have to go through the subconscious to really get to this other state, this divine state, this, supra consciousness state, which I think alchemy wanted to get to ultimately, and sublime that through into the physical. So really bringing that pure gold sovereignty of being in soul, right? And actually alchemy is quite interesting because it has the three parts. It has the body, it has the spirit, and it has the soul. And in a way, it's almost like the body, the salt, is the consciousness. It's the awareness of the physical things, and the awareness of spirit. And spirit is actually the mind, which is actually the Mercury. And it actually is the understanding, and I would say the subconscious, and then the soul, which is the sulfur, is the extraordinary divine link that is basically always, never dying. Whereas the spirit changes depending on what you have. If you have a rose, it's got that, let's say, mental impression of, which is the subconscious to me, bringing a certain program of how it's going to manifest into the physical. That rose, which basically the rose is going to have a subconscious program within all of us, where we have an experience with that rose that usually means very similar things, because it's the spirit of the rose that's interacting with us as we interact with the physical manifestation of that spirit. But the soul piece is where we're all connected. Everything comes from source. Everything returns to source. Everything is source. So this is where, when you go into that super consciousness, it goes beyond duality, goes beyond bad or good. There just is a massive amount of potential that source manifests. And so there's a process for how source manifests itself into the minute and into higher evolutions, such as the human, which is definitely not the highest evolution, perhaps on this planet right now, as we think, even though I would, challenge that. Understanding that whales and dolphins, to me, have much higher subconscious understanding. And it's very hard to understand what they consciously are aware of, whether they are subconsciously just way more in tune, and therefore they have a easier path towards that super consciousness and subconsciousness that then manifests, or whether they really are aware. I mean, at one point, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, science didn't believe that plants had a certain conscious awareness, and we defined consciousness as the awareness of, something, that we are intelligent, that we are self-aware, right? Where, to me, even a plant is self-aware of itself, even though the process is maybe, let's say, primary, right? Easy, it's simple, where the plant always looks at where it's been and where it's going in its own manifestation to move forward in the present towards its growth, towards its purpose. But then eventually, I truly, and this is, I guess, where the shamanic training of spending massive amounts of time alone in nature, where you meld into this network of nature, this matrix of the subconscious, superconscious, and conscious, allows you to become aware, therefore become conscious of all of these interactions that are happening, and therefore become conscious that actually the plant is conscious of you and your interaction, and can actually start speaking with you, which is, crazy in our limited view of things, but it's actually incredible and magical when you really look at the potential and the possibility of that happening over and over and over. And you can even train somebody to do that over and over and over. So there is that science to it. It's just that science sometimes, or at least in the past, was blocked on the fact that conscious awareness was reserved to us humans. But now that it's actually allowing, in the last 10 years, the word consciousness to enter into its own paradigm, and it's basically trying to figure it out, even though it's having a hard time. I mean, we're still in a debate of whether it's external or internal. Is it limited to the brain, or is it external? And it's this magic woo-woo thing. It's absolutely fundamental, because consciousness does have power over matter, and that's been shown. And so what is this consciousness? And I think this is where we're at today. We're in this beautiful moment where we're here to understand conscious awareness. And in that, there's this incredible freedom that's happening, and we're seeing it today, where the manipulation of our subconscious is being freed. And so anyone who is wanting to control through awareness others are losing the battle, because we are freeing ourselves in starting to understand our own subconscious function. And as we move forward, we're going to start entering into these states of grace, these states of altered higher superconsciousness. And so obviously this is the evolution that's going on right now. I mean, this is really the shift into this new age that we're entering in 2020 at the end here. And it will take some time to kind of dismantle some of the old ways of thinking and some of the old structures that prevent that from happening. And it's going to take some time to actually move new structures into this new reality that we are all connected, interconnected. Our subconscious is incredibly deep, incredibly powerful, and can truly help us maneuver into a whole new way of being. So I hope you enjoyed that. And obviously I have a course on Soulvana that helps you go deeper into exploring these 3 states of consciousness so that you can actually feel it, and you can go deeper into the extraordinary aspects of extraordinary consciousness where, time ceases to exist, for example, and you can be in complete presence, which a lot of Eckhart Tolle's teachings are about. And it's moving you into this deep state of soul. So check that out. And otherwise, I hope I inspired some thought for you today. Enjoy.